My name is Mark Mamagonian. I'm the Academic Director of the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. It's usually my privilege and pleasure to offer introductory remarks today, but today I just want to say hello, and I want to turn things over to a member of the NAASR board and a member of the organizing committee for this event and for other similar events, and really the person who drove the agenda for this event today, Judy Sarian. So Judy, won't you come on down?
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you all for coming. Welcome on behalf of the co-sponsors of today's program, which was organized under the auspices of the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research and Kalus Gulbenkian Foundation, and also co-sponsored by the Harvard Armenian Society and the MIT Armenian Society. And I'm happy to say that the presidents of both the Armenian and MIT societies are here today. They are Lena Ayvazyan, Mark Poghosyan, and Armin Samurkasyan. So thank you so much. We also want to thank our distinguished panelists who are here, Ambassador John Evans and Professor Miguel Basáñez, and also Dr. Anna Ohanyan, as well as our distinguished panelists in Armenia and Panama, who are all here. And they are Isabella Sarkisian, Tevan Poghosyan, and Sona Ayvazyan, who is currently in Panama, and they're all three joining us by way of Skype. So we're really pleased and honored that they have all agreed to be part of this exciting event. As I said, I want to thank you all for coming. This is part of the contemporary topic series that we started 2 years ago. We've had several events under this, the aegis of the contemporary topic series. They've been very well attended. There's been a lot of interest, and we hope to hold many more such events in our soon-to-be renovated NAASR building in Belmont, Massachusetts. We are planning to have the NAASR building become the global center to connect scholars of Armenian studies and the public. And there are many ways you can all be involved in this. First and foremost, we'd like all of you here to become members of NAASR. It's a very easy thing to do. All you have to do is come up and speak with me or any one of our NAASR board members. We have several here today, so if you want to raise your hand so that people can find you. Thank you, and so we'd love you to become a member if you're not one already. We also want to just mention that there are many ways to contribute to the new renovation of the NAASR building, including having your name on a beautiful manuscript that was created by two young artists who are here today. And you will have your name written in calligraphy for a donation of $1,000. There's also another way to donate. You can donate to have a naming opportunity in the building. And that includes having your name on a chair in our brand new auditorium, which will be technologically equipped to connect Armenians all around the world. So please consider these opportunities. We want you to be a part of NAASR. We all want you all to be part of the future of NAASR. At the conclusion of the program, we will have a reception, and there will be some refreshments. And we will also be selling copies of 2 publications by our panelist, Ambassador John Evans. They will be available for purchase and signing. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Anna Ohanyan. She is the Richard B. Finnegan Distinguished Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Stonehill College. Her most recent book is Networked Regionalism as conflict management, and it's been published by Stanford University Press. Thank you again, and with that I'd like to introduce Dr. Anna Ohanyan.
I'm going to start with our first question and trying to look at Mexico. Mexico is really an exciting case because it did have a single-party dominant system for almost a century, and the transfer of power was carried out through the ballot box. The first question that I have is for Professor Basáñez, what are the lessons learned from Mexico that you think could apply for Armenia? How did it become possible to push for political change through the ballot box? What are the developments that made it possible? What was the nature of electoral fraud practiced in Mexico throughout much of the 20th century? How central was its impact on Mexico's democratic evolution?
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the questions. I agree with you that Mexico may offer some lessons that can be learned because of the similarities. On your 4 questions, what I would say is yes, transition is possible, which is an optimistic message, and I was part of that in Mexico. Number 2, how was that possible in Mexico? It was very much through public opinion polling. Mexico is the first country in the 20th century that went into a social movement, a social revolution in 1910. It set up a new political system that became very stable, and in 1933 began a very successful economic career for 50 years. It was growing over 6% a year. So that went all the way up to 1982. During those years, people was, of course, very pleased on the kind of material improvements that the world, that Mexico was having. So there was not much of a problem. Fraud was not that a necessity. In 1910, 80% of the population were living in the rural areas, but highly uneducated, literacy was very low, and highly uncommunicated. During those 50 years of improvements, the image reversed. Instead of having 80% rural population, it came down to 25%, and so the rest moved to the cities. Highly communicated. Education moved up, literacy rates moved very much up. That changed what Mexico was. Then fraud in elections started becoming a necessity. So on your 3rd question, how was that possible? That success produced in 1968, when the student movement in Paris and in many countries of the world were shaking institutions, that produced the same in Mexico. In 1968, I was a student on those years. There we have the first really call for democracy. And there was a huge repression, but 20 years later, in 1988, there was the first split of the governmental party that produced a big portion of very highly respected Mexicans to form a new political party. And in 1988, I am guilty as charged of having introduced public opinion polling in Mexico for elections, and that really mobilized civil society, because before public opinion polling, it was government who said the outcome of election is 90%, 95% for the government party. Nobody could say otherwise. So public opinion polling in that election of 1988, the poll that I produced said, yes, the government party is going to win, but it will get 43%. That was really shocking. The group of scholars that were doing that were highly persecuted because we were not agreeing on accepting 63%, and then the whole story began. But the important thing is that public opinion polling really produced a huge wave of energy behind changing, and then that was 88. The following year, the first state governor moved to an opposition party. Another year at the municipal levels, there was a change of political party. In 97, almost 10 years later, Congress changed to opposition, and in 2000, the president went to an opposition party. So it took time, I was desperate. I wanted to see change faster. It took time, but it slowly moved forward.
But basically, introduction of alternative information, alternative data, to diversify the data that played an important role, you're saying?
Absolutely. The most important factor was transparency. It made elections transparent for the public. And then, of course, public said, yes, we believe the opinion poll data. We don't believe the official data that the government is giving. And so that was very powerful.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now let's shift gears to talk about Armenia a little bit. So as you know, this spring, in the upcoming parliamentary elections, Armenia will be transitioning from semi-presidential to parliamentary political system. And it is really great to have Tevan Poghosyan with us, who can speak to us to what that means for America's democratic evolution. Does it make America more, United Armenia? I'm still stuck on the presidential elections here, sorry. But we're not going to talk about the American elections, I guarantee you that. So in the context of Armenia, so as Armenia will transition from semi-presidential to parliamentary, what it means for Armenia's democracy. So perhaps Tevan Poghosyan will talk about that. But even before we address that question, so we'll get to that, let's now talk specifically to the problem of electoral fraud in the case of Armenia, which is a really young state compared to Mexico, particularly compared to Mexico. So what I would like to know is what are some of the main forms of its practice and manifestation? The problem does come in different shades and forms and shapes. So it'd be great to know as to what are the forms that are practiced in Armenia, what are the causes and consequences. So perhaps could hear first from Ambassador Evans, and then we can shift gears to our Skypers, and we could hear from Isabella and Sona, and then I will go back to Tevan, who will talk about the transition from semi-presidential to parliamentary system in Armenia. Yeah? Ambassador?
Thank you, Anna. I hope this is working. I think it's important to go back to a basic concept involved in democratic practice around the world, and that is the concept of free and fair elections. And there's a little distinction between those two. I was privileged to be in Copenhagen in 1991 when the organization, well, it was then the Conference for Security and Cooperation in Europe, held a conference on democracy. And I was Ambassador Campbellman's deputy there. And we sat down with the 35 countries then involved, and we tried to define what it means to have a free and fair election. The point is, it's not simply that there's a secret ballot and that people are free to go into the polling place and not to be pressured. That is the technical points of the election day. But it's also a broader concept of what happens before election day. Is there a free press? Is there an ability for people to register to be candidates, to exercise their right to hold or to seek office? Are the media giving fair time to all candidates? And so on and so forth. So there's a broader concept here, and that's why the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, which is based in Warsaw and deploys election monitoring teams, that's why they send short-term teams to the various countries to look at what happens right before and after and during election day, but they also deploy long-term teams, getting there as much as six months ahead of the election. Usually more like 3 months, but still. So they get a sense of how the electoral process is working. So I just want to put that in. And one other note that I'd like to get back to later, because this is a big concept. Democracy is not only what happens on election day. And there are a lot of other things, rule of law, freedom of the media, and so on. We need to talk about that as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's move to our Skypers. Sona, would you like to talk about the problem in Armenia?
The electoral fraud is a usual practice in Armenia, unfortunately. It's a tool that the government can use in order to reproduce itself, in order to come to power again and again. And this is why we are not witnessing any change in the government. Elections is the fourth and most important step in the democracy building. It's true that by elections itself only, it's not, the elections themselves are not able to guarantee the democratic governance. However, if we do not have elected officials, we have much less chances to get good governance. And the fact is that in Armenia, elections are being rigged continuously, year by year. Though Armenia is doing better in comparison with some other Soviet countries, meaning Azerbaijan or Central Asian republics, let's say, we have some human rights, some rule of law, some freedom of speech, some access to justice, some participation in the decision making. However, it's very far. We are very far from being called a democratic state. And one major reason is because elections are being falsified in Armenia. The ways that falsification takes place is different. Administrative resource accompanied with vote buying, multiple voting, intimidation of voters, proxies and electoral commissions, ballot stuffing, people stuffing, falsification of the results. And as a matter of fact, the election falsifiers are not being punished. And the law enforcement bodies and courts, most often, they refuse or close cases in favor of the violators. As a result, we are getting back very rapidly to the Soviet type of single political party system. As a result, we have a very disappointed society, which is desperate to believe in any change, as they're not able to change the very irresponsible government. And as a result, what is more dangerous, we have a very cynical attitude towards the elections and towards the electoral system and towards the democratic system of government in general. Since 2013, within the Citizen Observer initiative, we had more than 1,000 men and women participating in the observation process. Through their hard work and devotion, they basically managed to prevent hundreds of violations, identify hundreds of inaccuracies within the voters' lists. Hundreds of violations have been documented by our observers. They were able to defend the votes of hundreds of thousands of people throughout Armenia. And they also took part in hundreds of complaints addressed to different bodies, electoral commissions, courts, as well as law enforcement bodies. And though we were not able to reverse the fraudulent results of some elections, and particularly, for example, the constitutional referendum, at least our observers contributed to the generation of a significant volume of evidence on the quality of the elections and identified that, for example, the referendum was rigged and the constitution didn't actually pass. I should mention about the diaspora involvement in our election observation process as well. A particular role since 2013 was played by the expat community in Yerevan, in Armenia, as well as some diaspora Armenians. Having experience in living in democratic societies, they have a deeper understanding of democratic values, importance of the elections, importance of active citizenry. They are not linked with the family ties with corrupt officials or their surroundings, and they are much more free expressing their standing in taking actions during the observation process.
So, can you sum up in terms of what are some of the major problems, major dimensions of the problem? And then we pass to Isabella.
Okay, so the problem is just different ways of violation of the election results, basically.
Okay. So
the government, the authorities are using different mechanisms, starting from the voter lists which include hundreds of thousands of Armenians living outside of Armenia and not allowing these Armenians to vote.
Okay.
Ballot stuffing, administrative resource use, people bringing to the precinct and forcing them to vote for this or that candidate, intimidation. So these are the major mechanisms. And within this latest new electoral code adopted, we basically will have the vote buying as a major instrument, which has been basically legalized with this new electoral code.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sona. Isabella, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a very brief remark about opinion polls, because having this background of sociology, that's a part of discussion among sociological community of Armenia, that quantitative sociology is in a big trouble in this country. And I think also in US, people lie. They said, yes, we are going to vote for these people, when in reality, when they went to the booths, they voted for someone else. So in Armenia, it's in a different crisis, and no one believes in any sociological survey. Maybe CRRC is a little bit of exception. I don't really want to get into that issue because this is an issue of separate discussion, academic discussion and methodology discussion, but just to make it clear that opinion polls is not something.
So you're saying that opinion polls also are not trusted?
I think what Isabella is raising is a very important point that we discovered 25 years ago, that if we ask respondents on their homes, they would lie about what they were going to do. So I began experimenting with a very unorthodox methodology, which was asking people on the streets, emphasizing that it was an anonymous survey, that I didn't want to know. It took us a lot of trouble on how we guarantee randomness. But my scientific community says if it is not random, it's not valid. So if I did the surveys at home, it was perfectly fine, scientifically speaking, but they tell nothing about the real intentions. If I did the surveys on the streets, that was not that good, scientifically speaking, but I got what the real truth was. Now, 25 years later, today we are finding something similar that we saw in Brexit, we saw it in the US, and that is something that pollsters around the world we have to take that into account. So that is a very important one. Surveys are in a big trouble right now.
Very good.
I'd like to comment on the technical equipment and those technical possibilities that have been funded by the European Union or are promised to be funded. So what happened actually, yes, the government really agreed to some of the demands of the political parties and for demands that have been pushed by civil society for years to publish the voters' lists and to equip the precincts with video cameras. That has been the demand of ours, and we believe that that will minimize the number of the violations inside the precincts, as well as it will allow for citizens of Armenia to check themselves for each person whether their absent neighbor or their relative has been suddenly voted during the elections when they were absent for country for many, many years. So this was demand, and it has been allowed basically by the government to publish. But what happened? The government successfully cheated both the political parties and civil society as well as the funding organizations, because they promised to do this. However, after they agreed, after they gave the promises to fund, after they praised themselves for this political consensus, suddenly they introduced criminal liability for false reporting on the voters voting instead of other persons, unintentional false reporting, which means that somebody, if they observe some problem and they observe that somebody has voted instead of an absent relative or neighbor. And if they file a complaint with the prosecutor's office, they are in a risk of being prosecuted if suddenly they have been mistaken. They did it with a good purpose, but they are not able to check this information themselves because a person could have come and voted and then left the country again. So they are in a risk. And the government basically it seems that they agreed to publicize the voter list, established a very strong tool. I mean, they introduced a strong tool against the publicity of the list. Basically, the citizens will be intimidated to watch and go and report to the prosecutor's office if they even witness in some violations like that. That's why we have reservations in calling this as a positive change and having some hopes that it will allow for less abuse of the voters list in reality.
Very good. It sounds like there is a need for constant engagement by the civil society as well as political parties, and that this is an ongoing process.
I wanted to say about diaspora involvement, and just since the time is short, I wanted to show 2 slides, also to convince maybe diasporan people, young or old, men or women, to come. If I may, I just would like to show you a slide. This is a statistical analysis done by a Russian guy.
We can't see it, Isabella. We can't see the slide.
Yeah, I will show you now. I just like to explain and then show slide. This is done by a Russian guy who used to be an observer in one of the precincts in Ararat, actually, which was not very nice, actually, place. So you can look in it. Can you see it?
We can't see it really well. That's very good.
Yeah, so you can see, this is Armavir, 20th district. This is during the constitutional referendum. And all these big numbers that you see up here, up to 90% of yes votes. All the places where there were no observers or not very strong observers. And you see these 2, which are going down to 30%. Yeah. Those are the ones where there were these Russian guys. So you can see that the averages was 65, and in two polling stations, number 20, 43, and 44, yes vote was only 21 and 24%. So this is just an example how presence of a foreign observer could change things. I'd also like to show you this one, another slide. This is Yerevan, and the red ones are yes and blue ones are no. So you can see that sometimes they are so close to each other. And then we went to check why in blue ones there was such a number of no, and in red ones there were a lot of yes. And it turns out that in those places where we had strong observers and strong members of commissions or proxies, we had this no result. When in red cases, in red spots, where the yes actually won, because Zeytun and Poghosyan, what are quite central districts of Yerevan, in those places there were no people or there was no control. These are just examples that I wanted to bring also to convince people to come. Of course, it's not going to be a panacea. It's not going to be the only way out. But I believe that we can at least protect voices or defend voices of those people who came there at the end of the day and voted the way they voted.
But very quickly, so your data, the slide you put up, very quickly shows that monitoring works, number one. And number two, that your next argument is that there is room, there's space for diaspora to get civically involved, which actually the first beneficiary of this is diaspora itself, because it's a wonderful way to strengthen, to connect diaspora to the homeland. So with that, I'm going to maybe, let's say if I want to come and be a monitor, election observer, right? What does it entail? Maybe Sona can talk about the logistics?
Several thoughts. As I mentioned, that diaspora participation really matters. For many years, diaspora has been presented and has been perceived by the Armenian community as like supporters in financial terms, economic terms, and never in the democracy terms. Cooperation of diaspora and Armenian community is really important for sharing the experiences, sharing these democratic values from where some of the diasporan people come. That's why we extend our call to the diaspora. As I mentioned earlier, we already had an experience with diasporans, and we were very much pleased, and we felt the difference even with diaspora engagement and local people engagement, as I mentioned, because, and Isabella confirmed this, because they do not have family ties with the corrupt officials. They are not, it's not easy to intimidate them in a way that they can intimidate the local people. What we suggest that, first of all, we have created an online registration platform for diaspora people and for local people as well, but especially for the diasporans I will talk. So whoever is interested, they can register on this platform. We propose that they come, at the moment, it seems that the election will be held on the 2nd of April. So we suggest that they come at least 3 days earlier and leave 3 days later, so that earlier they get some instructions, they get introduced to the local culture if they are not aware of that, of course, and afterwards they might take part in the complaint process. This is why we suggest they reserve a week to stay in Armenia. We will offer an online video training course for them, so that when they come to Armenia, they are already aware of the electoral legislation, of the rights of observers, what they need to do, some specific details, how they need to report, what will be the result of their work. So we will provide all these instructions. We just need their commitment, their willingness to participate, and let's really help. So we anticipate that this integration should continue, and there should be, we don't have many thoughts at the moment, but we think that this diaspora engagement in our life should really take later stages probably.
Tevan?
Yes, thank you very much for this. I really appreciate for the all stories that my friends presented, Isabella and Sona, both. The most worrying point over which exists for me is that sometimes diaspora is also different. Diaspora also have relatives and friends here, but also many times we're seeing that diasporans may be also not taking cases on the level of the seriousness, which I monitored in a few cases, and this should be really also on the devotion. That I would say that, as Sona mentioned correctly, that it's maybe 1 week, even less time. Maybe 2 weeks should be here for, in the detailed way, starting the new law. Because if one case would be even that, for example, diaspora didn't done it according to law, if there was some small mistake, government or authorities will make out of that one case such a big story, and will put such a big problem on over the way that feel like it has been politically manipulation. So I remember when last summer, I think, we have a case with the electric Yerevan, and for example, standing all night there as so-called security buffer wall with my colleagues from the parliament. Thousands of diasporans has been coming just to take the photo and go away. And this was many times cases over which people starting saying that they are not serious. And it's not the serious way how they engaging with us or how they going to support. I think if people here, for example, Isabella has been head of the printing on an election, and definitely she has been taking everything very seriously as strict to the law. I believe that there are some heads of the commissions which are really not taking that issue strongly and seriously, and they are the ones who chief manipulators, we need to be very careful that any diasporan who is here, the same way as supporter, the same way as a very strong partner, they could be also in a condition where later on they could, one case, two cases, but it would be enough to spoil the answer.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. And to Professor Basáñez and Ambassador Evans for joining us. Together. Thank you very much. And good night to you, the Skypers. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.